Hello and welcome to the David's Review, and today we're going to be discussing the 6 shortlisted titles for the International Man Booker Prize. Okay, so we're going to start with Till.
Till. Cool. Till is a picaresque book about a fool character in German medieval literature called Till, who has been brought into the 17th century during the 30 Years' War. And the book follows him interacting with loads of like the royal people and historical figures in a kind of magic real way. I think that's the gist.
And it jumps about in time as well. So you kind of get these little snapshots, not always from Till's point of view. They can be kind of focused on different characters, but he's always sort of coming in and out focus throughout the story.
More character-driven novel or plot-driven?
It's of the books I've read, it was like very plot, character, traditional novel type stuff. I wouldn't say it's like a 5-act structure type thing. It's like it dots around a lot in time, but it is very much like there is a story, there are characters who come and go, there is a sort of emotional through line.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, I don't know if I'm not sure if I could say whether it's character driven or it's probably theme driven more. There's the kind of idea of this kind of chaos, this really chaotic war and this kind of brutalized landscape. And on the one hand, you've got the peasants who are kind of at the whim of those in power, and then you've got these kind of hubris-filled eccentrics who are waging the war or trying to stay in power or losing power and that kind of thing.
Sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it was a very timely novel to read. I mean, you know, with everything that's going on, feeling that, you know, as a kind of ordinary person, you've lost the grip on reality, that or any control of your life, and things, you know, events are just overtaking everybody. Felt very timely. But also kind of the fact that Till, having started at the very bottom of society, kind of rejects all of the kind of conventions of society, all of the conventional things that people should care about, and kind of embraces chaos and lives outside of the power structures, is also quite uplifting, so and empowering. So, yeah, I liked him.
Of the 6, it was your favourite?
Yeah.
What lifted it above the others?
I mean, as I say, I think it's partly like it was the book I needed to read at the time. Right. But I think also just, you know, this sort of satirical elements I really enjoyed. Yeah, I mean, I like tricksters anyway. So yeah, and there are a lot of the. I think it was really well done. But I also think that it sort of ticked a load of my boxes. So
sounds a little bit King Lear-esque. Am I?
There are loads of references to King Lear. Like I think there's one whole bit which is like kind of pastiche of King Lear. It reminds me a lot of it's very much in a sort of German novel tradition. For me, it felt like reading a sort of much easier to read Thomas Mann kind of thing. He does historical novels. His is very weighty. They're very dense, particularly in like the main English translation, whereas this was much lighter. It was really fun. I thought it was really fun to read, which is nice given this short list.
Yeah, and when you're reading like 6 books like that back to back, then Till definitely stands out as being a kind of
it was definitely like
funnier. I laughed.
That
was nice.
There were books where like I'd put it down, like shorter books where I'd put it down, and about a week later I'd be like, okay, I better pick this up and start reading this again. Whereas with Till, I actually did read like 100 pages a day. I was like really into it.
So our second book on the list is The Memory Police. And this is Annie and Ambrose. I think you read this.
Yeah, so it's set on an island in Japan, and this island is quite bizarre where the people on the island their memory of certain things would disappear, and they had to get rid of all the belongings that would be attached to this memory of this thing, anything really. And the narrator is a young novelist, and she lives on this island, and things happen, memories disappear, etc.
Is this in a science fiction sense or a surreal?
It's kind of speculative fiction, but there's not everything else about it is normal. That's just that kind of one speculative element that they're trapped on this island, and that things keep sort of disappearing from existence for them.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it begins sort of with the narrator describing her life sort of before all this begins, or sort of kind of her early memories where things are more normal, and as the novel progresses it really does just get quite a bit more bizarre with the things that were being forgotten about. Not a spoiler alert, but a very important thing in someone's life eventually disappears from the people on this island's memory, and that's kind of the climactic loss, I suppose, and then things kind of get very derailed from that point onwards, and then really kind of the prose disappears.
It's kind of, I thought was interesting was sort of how they never really kind of reconcile themselves to any of the losses.
No.
Including, like, you know, because she talks a lot about her past and about her parents and that kind of thing, and you kind of get the impression that they're never processed, I guess, all the losses that people have, including the ones that aren't just loss of memory but deaths and that kind of thing, just sort of left in the air.
Yeah, or unimportant, or kind of that's a thing that's happened, let's move on because something else is going to happen next. It kind of felt like very onwards and upwards for all the for the entire island.
So when you say the prose disappears, is this a negative thing, or is it something that enhances the loss of the memory? Then is it used as a tool?
I think it's very much a tool, but I think it negatively impacts the reading for me personally, because it becomes more and more interesting, if that not uninteresting, but more I found it difficult to continue as the memories disappear, because I was kind of detached to the narrative as it continued.
Yeah, it was a weird effect, because the effect of the whole novel is to have this kind of lightness, because people don't have these things to cling to. But for me, part of that effect was I found it difficult to cling to as a reader, or to dig into, in a way that sort of some of the other novels maybe had a lot of detail and specificity and grit to them. And so this novel was quite kind of light and airy and floaty, I guess, because of the effect that was being created, you know, of not having your memories. But as I say, the downside of that was I didn't connect with it as well as some of the other books.
I think grit is an important word that this book definitely lacks, because I'm very much the kind of person that needs gritty narrative to kind of really get into a book. And I did read Memory Police quite quickly, and in the end was like, that was good. I didn't dislike the book, but because there was no grit to it, it didn't stay with me. It didn't leave a lasting impression of a successful read of the year.
Because because a lot of the prose is really beautiful, the way it's written. But yeah, there was something kind of, it was hard to hold on to, and I guess maybe deliberately so.
I would argue that was definitely deliberate. Yeah.
But then
But then how successful is that of a novel? As on a reader level, it wouldn't be that successful, but on maybe a text or a piece of art level, that's very successful, because that does exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
I was going to ask, it sounds like it really conceptually follows through.
Yeah. I was going to say it's quite often the way that you've got a clever motif that works well, but doesn't necessarily act as a vehicle for an enjoyable experience.
Yeah. We were saying that Till's the funniest and lightest one, but also Memory Police. Well, you didn't say light, but Memory Police is very light and not overly depressing in a way. But the things that happen in it are quite depressing and sad.
it gets pretty grim towards the end.
Yeah, right towards the end. But I don't think it's quite depressing. I think maybe it's because the lack of grit that we were talking about makes it not so dark. It didn't feel overly dark. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah. I think as well with the sort of the main character was, I don't know, I found it kind of hard to pin down, and again maybe that's deliberate. But
And she's a novelist, and there's parts of the novel that she's writing in the book, and I really liked those.
Yeah.
I wanted to read that story. It was a really interesting story about a woman that gets locked in a tower, or like her teacher's tower or something. I can't remember completely, but it sounded really, really great. That's what I wanted to read.
no, I must admit I kind of got into those more.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, it's interesting that she could kind of express herself that way in a way that she couldn't in her real life.
Yeah. It was still good though. I did like reading the book. It was a good book.
Okay, so our next book is The Discomfort of Evening. Who would like to do a little précis for that?
Why don't you?
Why don't I? Well, it's set on a farm in the Netherlands during foot and mouth outbreak, and it's told from the viewpoint of
Jazz. Yes.
Yeah, the middle sibling of a family, which it's a very dysfunctional family, which becomes more and more dysfunctional as it goes on. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that it kind of starts with the loss of one of the siblings.
I think it says on the blurb.
I think it's it says on the blurb, and I think chapter 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Very early on.
And this causes the eventual sort of decline of this sort of family structure.
No, it seems like the structure was never really.
No, exactly. I
in
think
the
that's
first
something we can dissect when we get into it. I liked it. I like grim, depressing things. It's sort of, because let's be honest here, folks, it's pretty grim.
Yeah, it's one of the grimmest books I've read recently, and struggled with some parts.
How did I miss this book?
Yeah, you'd like it. I mean, I lived through foot and mouth. I think I must have been doing my A levels. Maybe this is when I was in Wales, but I mean, absolutely destroyed the lives of the farming community, and so I kind of think it echoes the, they've got a loss, the death of a son in the family, and then the death of the farm really heightens that.
Yeah. I think you got it right. Everything just goes from bad to worse to terrible to this is horrifyingly unhappy for everyone involved in this book. No one has a good time. I didn't have a good time, but I had a really good time because the narrative was really, really nice, and I think that the characters are oddly compelling.
Absolutely.
Because the family dynamic is so off, but it's quite special, because you don't read those kind of... I don't read that kind of dysfunctional levels often, and it was pretty intense.
Well, I think what the author gets absolutely spot on is the sort of the characterization, the sort of the different worlds of the adult world and the world of the child, because so much of it happens within the world of the child, doesn't it? The adults are sort of peripheral, and you have and they kind of, the children clique together. Some are trying to escape, some are, but they're dealing with the death of their sibling in different ways, and that kind of breakdown, because it's being unmanaged by the parents. They're dealing with their own problems, their own strife, and they're not really understanding the plight of the children. It's a very realistic and a natural breakdown, isn't it, of these characters?
Yeah. But what did you personally? Well, you haven't finished it.
Oh no,
right here.
I haven't managed to get to the end, so I'm kind of like I'm kind of in the second half of it. Yeah, I mean, I have found it really compelling to read, as you say, because the characters are so sort of well drawn, and the dynamic, and it feels, it feels so real as a dysfunctional family. But it's
It's hard work.
it's hard work, and I kind of think every time they go near an animal, I'm just cringing because I just know something horrible's going to happen.
Yeah, particularly the son. Yeah.
Yeah, the boy, the male in it, it's just crazy what happened, what he gets up to, and the girls as well. And the three of them together, it's just all too much, isn't it?
It's
Really,
the kind of holes that the parents leave by not parenting over certain subjects, and I think some of it's partly to do with the religion, isn't it? Because they don't parent over anything sexual, so that's omitted. So that's one hole they've got in their lives,
and that's always an issue.
And that's presumably been prior to the start, even prior to the death of the eldest son.
Yes.
Yeah. And then so the kids are filling that gap in a horrible way, and then. Well, not always horrible, but sometimes horrible. And then, and then you've got the kind of the loss of affection and touch and everything.
Yeah, particularly from the mother. The mother character really is just disconnected completely.
Yeah,
that sexual dysmorphia is horribly accurate of village life. I have to say.
This is going to be like a weird question. Is this book at all funny? Because you say things like, oh, every time any of them go near animals, and it sounds unremittingly bleak, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. But also, I kind of like, that's quite a funny thing to say.
No, I think it's not funny.
Not funny at all. No.
Okay. I don't think there's any humour in it that I can remember. There's no humour in it that I would draw from it.
Not conventionally. I mean, I would disagree slightly in the sense that the situation it's like that awkward humor. It's amplifying things like Faulty Towers, whereby you're laughing about how cringy it is, sort of thing. There's a much darker, bleaker version of that. But
is that not more absurdity than humor?
Yeah, I think it is. You're certainly not laughing. You're not.
And I think the absurdity is you can't really laugh at it in this book because it is so grotesque. I think the grotesque kind of... And
it's damaging to the children as well, which is horrible to kind of witness.
Yeah. But obviously, you'd naturally you'd hear all this and you'd be like, I'm not reading that. But it's so... Yeah, you hear the horrible things and you think, I can't read that. But it was just so phenomenally written.
It's a compelling narrator.
Yeah, the narrator is phenomenal. The writing style in it is very readable. And it just flows really, really well. I don't like books where I have to do an awful lot of work.
Yeah, no, it is, and I mean, yeah, it's actually a surprisingly quick read considering.
Yeah, I think I read it over a few days just because I just wanted to.
Yeah,
even though the gruesome things that were happening, I had to finish the prose because it was so well written, and you had to find out what happened to these kids.
Yeah, I think partly you want to get through it because you just want to come up for air and
God, the children. But yeah, it was potentially my favourite. Probably not, but very close.
Okay, our next book is The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree. So Ambrose, would you like to do a précis for us?
Sure. So it's about a family, and it's in the decade following the Iranian Islamic Revolution, and the family flee Tehran, hoping that they can kind of maintain some of their previous lifestyle and intellectual pursuits, and things fall apart. The whole thing is narrated by the ghost of one of the children, which is in the blurb, so I'm okay to say it. It doesn't. I think it doesn't. It's not immediately apparent right at the start of the book, but it kind of quite quickly, I think, is revealed. So
I loved it. I've had this discussion. I recommend this book to quite a lot of people in the shop. Actually, I've said it before, but it's my favourite book of the year so far. I loved it. I loved everything about it. I have never really gone there with magic realism, so I think one of the main reasons that I enjoyed it so much was because I think I've really would get into magic realism if I read some more kind of like key books and maybe some off beaten track ones. But yeah, I loved it. I loved everything about it pretty much. Bar one or two moments.
Yeah, it's really successful in the way that it kind of builds up its kind of internal mythologies and draws on the kind of heritage of the country and the family and their own, personal ghosts and the kind of ghosts of their ancestors and all that. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's. Really...
I also like what was decided to be in there as the magic realism mythology. Personally, it involves like mermaids and harpies and things like that, and just it's not the kind of stuff that you would immediately expect from that time and that place, which obviously is magic realism, so that's understandable, but it two completely different areas that just meld together quite well, I think.
But it's honing in on the mythology of Persia and to aid the story of what's going on in the real world at the time. Or?
There's sort of lots of different aspects to it. So there is some sort of Persian or Iranian mythology, and you've got a kind of the family's ancestors was Zoroastrian, I think. So they're kind of so that's quite important to them, and they kind of uncover sort of various artifacts at points in the story that have resonance with them, and I think that's kind of important because obviously it's sort of showing like what's being lost. Okay. In the sort of zeal of the Islamic Revolution, all this kind of really rich heritage, personal and national, that's been kind of, really flattened basically in the kind of the movement of the revolutionaries.
I think all that's important to me, but like I said previously, I just love narration, and I love really strong narration, and that's what I got from it as well.
Yeah, the girl is great, isn't
she? Yeah, she's a good character and interacts well with the characters, and when she's not in it, she's still a good narrator. And I think generally
the fact you get to know her first, and then you find out how her story and how she's become a ghost, is just pretty heartbreaking.
And it's not the central point for this is my story and this is the story of my family and my country. That's not the central part of the book. It's not the narrator's story. It's her family story and her country's story. It's not all about her, which is really fantastic, I think. And I think her sister's story is potentially probably, it involves them all the family are heavily in the book, but I think her sister's probably the most in it, I think. And I think her story's probably my favourite because mermaids.
Is it a collection of different stories? It's reminding me a little bit of Red Earth and Pouring Rain by Vikram Chandra. Do you go from story to story, or is it? I
think you go from kind of, I don't know, like
it flows.
It does between. And it's not 100% linear, but it's not.
It's all interwoven, I think, and I think you'll get like a nugget of chapters all surrounding one member of the family or one aspect of the story, and then it'll flip and move. But like I said previously, I don't really like to have to work when I read a book, and I didn't with this, but I understand that people might. But I think because I was so engaged that I could.
That reminds me, because occasionally when they're telling a story about someone and that person telling a story about someone else, and there was a lot of kind of.
I loved that though. That one specific chapter, I think it was chapter 15. I think because I read up about it. It's about the story about so fantastic.
That's specifically why I mentioned Vikram Chandra, because I was wondering if that happens within Red Earth and Pouring Rain. So you get a story within a story, and then as you start pulling back out through the stories, you go, "Oh yeah, I was engaged in that."
Here we are.
Lose track a couple of times almost of it, but I think one of the reasons I wasn't like 100% sure about it, and this is sort of like and maybe I could be wrong, was just that kind of tension between the fact that they're so privileged they were obviously so privileged prior to the revolution. And I felt there was this kind of tension all the way through, that they seemed to be kind of not 100% aware of that. And sort of, they kind of blithely drift into this horror, don't they? And I kind of like, so maybe I'm sure that there was some of that was deliberate, but I kind of wondered whether, I don't know, the sort of idea of there having been quite a lot of people who weren't in that brilliant position.
You had zero.
Prior to the revolution was never really touched. And yeah, it's a personal story, but I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like every story is important, I suppose, and that's just that one.
Yeah.
That's that one.
Sure.
But yeah, I understand. But a lot of what happens to them is like, oh, jeez, man. Like, so unhappy, so miserable, but not to the level of Discomfort of Evening, kind of like more bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, obviously it's magic realism, but the bizarre ending for all the characters is bleak and bizarre, but Discomfort of Evening is just straight up bleak.
We're going to talk about The Adventures of China Iron now.
It's about a young woman who's been abandoned by her husband, but a husband who she didn't particularly like, with 2 young children. And you sort of found out as the story goes on that she's very young. It's set in Argentina. She meets a Scottish woman,
Liz.
Yeah, who's in a happy marriage, but her husband's gone off to. Is she meeting up with him to build a farm or something like that?
I cannot remember.
And so Liz is going to meet her husband, and she's got various supplies and a
wagon.
And so the 2 women go off into the countryside.
I think this is like reminding me a little bit of, I think when you were talking about it, that it feels like it's just a story.
Yeah, it's actually it's a subverse retelling technically, because it's the husband of China Ryan is the protagonist of an epic poem, is what it's based on. So this is the subversive retelling of the China Ryan, the wife. But apart from that, it's difficult to really tell. You obviously you explained what it's about, but also it's difficult to explain what it's about because it's not really about much.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. A lot of it's the kind of relationship, the friendship between the 2 women.
Yes.
Or I say women because as the story goes on, China Iron, who kind of is given the name Josephine because she doesn't really have a name, starts to kind of think that maybe she might be non-binary. I think that's the impression I get. Did you read far enough to? So as the story goes on, she's sort of exploring her gender a bit, and I think so. Yeah, so I think I don't know how much of a spoiler this is or whether it is a spoiler at all, but she's kind of identified, I think, more as sort of Two-Spirit by the end. So I kind of think she sort of feels like she has both a kind of female and male side, which she gets to explore in the story. So I'm saying she, but I think that there's a he as well, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
But I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed it for the first sort of half, and then there's a sort of middle section where they visit a fort. It's quite a brutal section. That sort of depicts slavery and
brutal is a common word.
It is, isn't it? And it's really kind of there's some really kind of clever tension within that whole section that where you're kind of convinced that this sort of really toxic environment is going to cause something horrible to happen to one or both of the women. But I don't know, I felt like, as I say, that tension's really good, but I don't know if that section goes on a little bit too long.
And did it lose you?
And there's something after that, the story kind of I don't know, it sort of drifted off a bit.
Never picked back up from what the magic was at the beginning.
So I don't know. I kind of like I did enjoy it, and there was some interesting kind of exploration of gender dynamics and and male power and that kind of thing, and colonialism that was well done, but. Yeah, it kind of, I felt it sort of, I don't know, towards the end, it just sort of felt like it sort of meandered off a bit. And
I personally liked the language of it. Yeah. I thought that the descriptive style of the countryside in Argentina was really strong, quite beautiful. And that part I very much enjoyed. And I quite enjoyed it structurally, kind of as a read, as a physical read. It's nothing like hurricane season in that sense. It's like they're like vignettes in a way, vignette chapter styles. And I think if you find books to be quite overwhelming, this would be quite a nice, mellow kind of read in the sense of reading a book. Yeah. But and I think if it was one of those books that you were interested in but you didn't have a lot of time, you could easily put it down and pick it back up again because of the style of it. But purely because of the plot line, I couldn't continue with it because I'm very plot based.
Yeah, and it is a lot about her kind of coming of age to find. Well, I don't know, maybe that's the wrong word, but sort of like finding who she is, because she's
got to find herself,
so eclipsed by the kind of grimness of her beginnings, and by this violent husband, and by her violent upbringing. You know, I mean, she doesn't really have a name. She's just another China, which is sort of, I think, a slang for woman, but not particularly complimentary. So.
No,
yeah. So I think, it's got good things to say, interesting things to say.
Our next book is Hurricane Season. Ambrose and Oscar, you have read this. I would pretend that I'd read it, but Annie won't let me get away with that. So I'm about...
You do? You're reading it?
I am 50% of the way through, I would say.
So it's set. Talk about bleak, by the way. Just that's the watchword here. It's set in a rural Mexican village, maybe a couple of years ago, I guess, when it was first published. And a figure in the village who is known as a witch has been found murdered. And the book kind of hops from character to character, like Rashomon style. And you sort of find out what happened, but you also find out who the witch really was and how the whole community kind of works and is entangled. And I thought it was brilliant, but I know that I would find it very difficult to recommend to people.
I agree. I think it's really engaging. So my only problem with it is, well, I'm sure in a moment we will talk about the structure and the language and grammar
and like one of the kind of key things. But
yeah, exactly. My only struggle with it is when to read it in a busy working life, because you don't know when to put this book down. This is my big thing. It's like, where shall I stop? Can I stop now? Can I?
Yeah, because there are no paragraphs.
Because there are no
very long sentences.
Yeah. So from a practical point of view, with the stuff going on in my life at the moment, I'm just finding that the hardest part of it. But if I had a few days, I would just sit and read that all the way through. I mean, I'm loving it.
I think I had the opposite problem. I think I found it difficult to pick back up. Like, I was definitely like, I'd finished, say, I'd read like a section at a time.
I agree. It's part and parcel.
Yeah. And I think particularly that would be a point at which I'd be like, I don't know if I want to enter this world again. I think I might want to watch Pokemon instead.
Yeah. Because it's exhausting. You know, as soon as you go in there, you're going to be at breakneck speed, just being hammered by
it. It is a lot. And it's relentlessly grim, but it's so kind of well realized and so just so specific, and the characters are, they're very believable, and
The grandmother.
the dynamics. So you can kind of see how everyone is horrible to everyone, and therefore you can kind of understand, even if you don't condone how they end up doing the horrible things they do, because they're all brutalizing each other constantly.
Yeah. But it's making a statement on that. Isn't it?
Sure,
Just how hatred just breeds hatred, and
and that kind of real, the most toxic masculinity.
oh god,
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of bringing up here. This is the big spoiler town we're going into now.
okay,
So skip ahead 4 minutes or whatever. About halfway through, you find out that the witch is actually a trans woman, who is very heavily involved in what you might call the gay community in this kind of very rural place. I, as someone who is not personally affected by these issues, or living in that kind of area, thought that it was horrible, and it was horrible, and it was horrible, but it was horrible in a way where it was very clear that what the author was doing was looking at the structures in which it was surrounded and embedded, and really I felt like she was dealing with them in a way that wasn't glib. It was serious and very well handled, but that doesn't alter the fact that it is a book about a dead trans person, which sucks for multiple reasons. Particularly when you get to the end of the book, and if there's an ostensible message behind the book, it is the only way out is death.
Oh, lovely.
Right?
Yes.
yeah. Well, that's interesting in itself, because it deals with two potential arguments here. It's like, are we upset that here we are, we've got a book that features the trans person and they have to die or deal with it, or is it beneficial to the argument because it's highlighting what trans people have to cope with? That's
I know we were talking about this just before the recording.
I kind of like when the sort of identity of the witch is sort of like given in more detail, and we find out that she's trans or was trans. I must admit, I kind of got a lot of whiplash, and I kind of put the book down that night, and I must admit I didn't sleep very well, and it was sort of, I did feel a bit kind of like, I think it's brilliantly written, but the fact that it's not about her, it's about everyone else in the village, and she is a corpse that stories hung on. It didn't sit that comfortably.
It's a bit like the Black Dahlia or Twin Peaks or something, where you've got this central figure. It's like the body that
I think it's that thing of I guess these are stories that are out there to be told, because trans women do get killed, but then I don't know, you kind of think, well, a lot of trans people live as well.
So
where are those
stories?
Yeah.
And
That's the story that was chosen.
On reflection, there are some books, which I won't name, where the death and rape of women are used as an excuse to do a kind of state of the nation style thing, and they're books which we still talk about and regularly laud.
Oh yeah.
And you read them also particularly now, and you're like, this is terrible, because it's not really dealing with the state of the nation. Even
there's one in particular.
I think we're probably thinking of the same one.
Which I absolutely hate.
And I thought that this book didn't do that, but I could totally understand if people didn't want to read it because of that kind of thing.
I mean, I think it never lets anyone off for their sins, effectively. On the other hand, you kind of, it really, really digs into how these things come about, how people's sort of sense of worth is torn down pretty much from the minute they kind of pop out into the world, and how they kind of like come to kind of loathe themselves and everyone around them. I mean, it's definitely, and now I'm talking about it, and we're sort of talking about, and compared to the other books, even some of them were really grim. you can feel the energy level in the room drop just talking about this book. I think it's probably like, wins the grimmest.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
I've not necessarily read a story that kind of really digs into that sort of psychology of that kind of, environment where, people are so frustrated in their every single desire and aim in life, and just so ground down by their situation, by their kind of impotence to change anything, by their poverty, by each other, by trauma, just the whole kind of package. And it really just does an amazing job of digging into that psychology.
There's no nice people.
You can't take that away from it. So,
I would
The
say.
Witch? Is The Witch nice?
We don't.
Or do we get
You get
anything?
so many other people's perspectives of the witch that
there isn't a, she doesn't have the first section is about her, but it's not from her perspective in the way that some of the other sections are really kind of from the other. So she's always kind of kept at a bit of a distance.
Okay.
I think I would say this is probably my pick of the books I read. Although I enjoyed Till far more, and I think far more people would have a better time reading Till. I think that the way that this kind of community was written about, the way that all of these really horrible issues and grim issues were dealt with in a very serious, situated, contextualized way, it never felt like it was being gratuitous. And it's so brutally well written. It's so awful to kind of be pulled along by it the whole time.
yeah.
It needs all the help it can get. Like, I don't think anyone. I would. There are so many people who I'd want to recommend this book to and would not be able to, because I know that they would have a terrible time and they would get like 30 pages into it and they would like. And I just don't.
Ring
I don't
you
think...
up and be like, hey.
Never take a book recommendation from
Yeah,
you
that's
again.
it.
Oscar, you suck.
Okay, so I just want to ask you though, would you have enjoyed it more if it had paragraphs?
I don't think so. So when I was reading it, the person I was really reminded of is the guy whose name I just looked up and cannot remember how to.
Krasnikorkai, I think, was
The guy who wrote Satan Tango, Melancholy of Resistance. He's like the 80s last great modernist. And he writes these kind of long, unending sentences without paragraph breaks. But his is far more a kind of European, like very literary tradition. It's not as colloquial as this is. But what you end up with is, I think, the affect of the kind of hopelessness and the waste and these kind of unending days which are spent kind of doing nothing. And I think that was really crucial, because I think a lot of the themes around the book, but also like the actual feeling of reading it, was you had to have that feeling if you were going to read it.
yeah.
Actually, so okay. To change the question, to answer even, I would have probably enjoyed it more, but I think it would have been a worse book as a result.
So I was going to basically like just key back to the memory police and the conversation that you and Annie had about the language and the motifs, and that they're needed to tell that story, but do they necessarily make it enjoyable, or do you lose something from it? It's exactly the same with that. It would have been a far weaker book if it had paragraphs, because the language just drives you through it, and it creates the pace and the chaos of that world that you're in, and yes, it makes it harder.
But that's the book that you got.
But it wouldn't have worked as well.
I kind of like, because I just it just hurt my eyes. And I eventually got into it, like, I got into the flow of it, and it kind of like I got pulled into the whole thing. But it did take, quite a bit. The first section I found really hard work.
So in conclusion, we've kind of mentioned our favourites, I think. Two of us.
What do people think is going to win? Because you've not read lots of them. Sorry, but you've heard a lot about, and you've got a good take on literature anyway. What do you? Shucks. What do you think? What do you personally think will take it? It might be one that you've.
I having said that it needs all the help it can get, Hurricane Season has already won quite a few prizes. It's the grimmest of the books. It's like the weightiest. So I think that I think that's got a pretty good chance. And Till, which is the other one I've read in full. As much as I love it, it's like the guy is the best-selling author in Germany. And I feel like it feels weird that it's on the International Man Booker, because it feels like such a sort of less... even though I think it's really good, and I think that it's got really serious things going for it, it certainly feels like it's being more fun and more kind of playful than what it sounds like a lot of the other books are.
I'm going to say that for a rising star, a very distinct voice, and I think just economy of words whilst telling such a cleverly crafted story, I think Discomfort of Evening could do it.
I think from everything, the description before you said it, I knew you were going to say that, just because the rising star element with this writer is phenomenal. I too think it will win, but I would like Green Gage Street to win. I think that could also take it as well, but I think Discomfort of Evening is just such a triumph of storytelling, and the writer themselves that they should win.
Ambrose,
because you've completed them all pretty much.
I just don't know, because I kind of think I don't know how they make these decisions. I mean, you've got 6 well-written books. How political is the decision? I don't know.
Well, that's with any prize, isn't it? So, in conclusion, are they all worthy of being on the shortlist?
I haven't completed them all, so I can't say if some are unworthy, and I think that's rude anyway, because its success shouldn't be measured by me. I read Little Eyes, which was on the long list, which I thoroughly enjoyed. That was the book that I read in a day. That was a bit intense, but it was a really good book, and I think that it deserves a spot. I'm not going to comment on who it should take a spot from, but I really liked that book. I thought it was successfully written and spooky, and narrative style was good, so I would have liked that to be on it as well.
Is there an element of I don't know, with the International Man Booker Prize, that we have to have grim and quirky and off the wall surreal? Is that, are we, because that's international literature, folks?
I think a lot of the time grim has something to do with it, because you want to get the real story. A lot of the time when you hear International Booker Prize, you want to hear from different countries, different cultures. And when you read, personally, when I'm reading a book, I want to hear about grit and struggle and real. And that's kind of, if your translation and novel is chosen for the International Booker Prize, is it because it's representing the true world of the country that it's written in? Yes. And usually that's done through grim and deep, which all of these are.
I think it's worth noting there is definitely a problem, I know, in certain, like when you have black authors and stuff, that they are expected to write gritty, realistic, or magic realist, but still kind of gritty things about their community.
The real.
The real. And they have to be from a certain thing. And it means that the people, it's not just like they're the people who get prizes, but it means that the people who don't fit that archetype don't get published.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that sees 5 out of 6 of these books being maybe magic realist, but also like about grim disturbances and upheavals and nasty things.
Yeah.
And the one that isn't is from the best-selling author in Germany for generations. And I wonder the extent to which it's fulfilling some of these stereotypes. But on the other hand, like, I live in England, was very cushy country in comparison to a lot of these. Maybe it's just...
But that was why I asked the question, because you have this kind of almost still the perpetuation of this kind of empirical kind of view that, off these windswept shores, everything is grim.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, do you have thoughts, by the way, in terms of, like, the shortlist and what you think it...
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy read, one after the other. And, you know, I did have a break for Hilary and Mantel, which is probably why I didn't finish the sixth one.
Thank God.
But, yeah.
Did you pick a favourite? I can't remember.
I mean, Till was my favourite, but I'm fairly surprised if it wasn't. Even though, as I say, it kind of does feel like it captures a certain...
Of the moment.
You know, of the moment feeling about Europe, at least, if not the world. Although I'm sure, I mean, like, across the world, a lot of people are in similar positions as far as having their autonomy quickly taken away by events and things. But yeah, I don't know. So I couldn't say what will win.
God, Ambrose, make a decision. You've read them all, and that's it.
I don't think it'll be the one man on the list.
Yeah.
That's true. It's mainly female.
Or
Wow,
you said
yeah.
maybe one non-binary person.
Yeah, just gone for the evening.
Just gonna vote evening.